We started today's program by looking at some of the special features that characterize Hong Kong's business environment. This naturally prompts the question, how far can Hong Kong borrow corporate governance reforms from the West? There's a lot of pressure on local regulators to adopt corporate governance requirements from the established market of the West. If only because international investors have come to see these requirements as indicator of safe or good corporate governance environment. Sometimes these new requirements will be beneficial, but some may be inappropriate in Hong Kong's different business environments. We asked our guests, how far can Hong Kong adopt overseas corporate governance initiatives, and how important it is to tailor corporate governance regulations to our local conditions.
Should we adopt whatever they're doing in the US or the UK or Australia, for example? That seems to be the direction that we're going at the moment. We seem to be adopting changes that they bring from those jurisdictions. But I've always questioned whether those regulations apply to Hong Kong, given the different shareholding structures that we have compared with the US, the UK, or Australia. Right? We have a very heavy family ownership. We have state ownership of mainland listed enterprises in Hong Kong. So can we then think outside of the box and then say we will adopt those that we think applies to our specific scenarios, right? For example, one idea that I've been talking about recently is this whole concept of independent non-executive directors. Is there really an effective independent non-executive director in Hong Kong? Well, the notion of independent directorships, right? How are independent directors appointed? Basically through the nomination process, they are elected by the members, but the members basically comprise a substantial or the majority shareholder. So in reality, you will not be an independent director unless you're acceptable to the majority or the substantial shareholder. Therein lies the perception problem, right? You elect an independent director, but my perception is this person is not totally independent. So why don't we dispense altogether with this notion of independent directors and just basically have executive directors and non-executive directors? So that's something that we can think about, right? But the problem is the independent director is something that has been brought in the US as well as Australia, and we seem to be adopting that.
Well, clearly Hong Kong and many other economies in this part of the world is very, very different, say, to the US environment. I think it would be wrong for regulatory bodies to mimic what's happening in the United States itself. I think we have to adjust and make provisions to the culture that's here. I think it's an ongoing process itself. I think the public itself has to understand what corporate governance is all about as well. And that's not necessarily a bad process. So I think we will evolve and we'll become better corporate citizens over a period of time. I think each society should set its own standard itself. And whether we here in Hong Kong in particular have achieved that standard, I'm not absolutely sure, because we have to really define what are our goals with regards to corporate governance issues. Who are the constituents that we're really addressing? Is it just shareholders, customers, creditors, employees, and so forth and so on? I think we have to define that ourselves. Clearly, we can use the UK standards and American standards as some sort of guidance, but it's not to suggest that their standards is the correct standard for us, and we have yet to achieve their standards. So I think we will evolve over a period of time to set our own standard. So I think that itself will be very, very, very useful.
And in fact, actually, different country and different organizations have their own background, you know. So there's no need to really adopt one common prescription and to follow it. Like China, you know, China is very unique in many dimensions. There's a lot of state-owned enterprises, and the government have a lot of still mainly administrative intervention in the commercial sector. So you cannot just really transform the Western practice to Hong Kong or even China. So we believe for any country or organization, there would be what we call the optimal combination or mixture of different arrangement and institutions and measures. And you really have to understanding the nature and the background of the country or the organization before you prescribe some measures to improve its, overall CG level.
Finally, we want to get an idea of where Hong Kong stands in terms of its corporate governance standards. Do investors regard Hong Kong as a risky place to invest? How do corporate governance standards of companies in Hong Kong compare with those elsewhere in Asia or in the West? We asked our guests to give us an idea of where Hong Kong stands in the Asian and world rankings in terms of corporate governance.
There are enough empirical evidence suggested that the level of corporate governance in Hong Kong has been standing out from the crowd. Probably in Asia, Hong Kong has been maintaining a very high level of corporate governance neck to neck compared to Singapore. So that firstly, I must strongly disagree with some of the street comments suggesting that the governance level of Hong Kong is lousy. I would say I strongly object to that kind of personal comments. When you look at on the rule base, the local regulators, they have been keep on evaluating the global trend of corporate governance practices, and they are not subscribing all the Western philosophy into Hong Kong. And then after full consultation, we have a pretty good corporate governance paradigm that is able to fit into the local environment. So to that, I would say the level of Hong Kong in terms of corporate governance practice, as I understand it, is pretty good.
It's quite clear in my mind that Hong Kong has raised the game. And one of the key messages that we've been delivering over the last 12 months is for directors to focus on the fact that the environment has changed. Regulators' expectations, investors' expectations have changed significantly over the last couple of years. In terms of the policy, I think our policies have got close to achieving the international benchmarks. To the extent that there is a readily identifiable international benchmark, our policies are very close to that level. Practice, on the other hand, is variable. It is patchy. You have some companies, some directors who achieve a very high standard of corporate governance. Equally, there are some truly appalling cases of corporate governance that I come across in my day-to-day work.